Hey everybody, I'm going to give you a little preview of what it's going to take to do discussion question number 1 for week 2 here. So discussion question number 1 is correlation and regression, and it uses the divorced student version file, which you should download from the site and open up in your SPSS the way we did last week. And let's take a look at what we need to do with this. So the first things should be very familiar because they're just what we did last week, and you're going to find we're going to do them every week. So you're going to do the frequencies, the central tendency, and the variability. And for two different variables, a variable that measures depression and a variable that measures feelings of hopelessness. So D-depret and D-feel2 are our two variables of interest there. Then we're going to run a correlation and regression analyses and obtain a scatter plot. So let's take a look and see what we need to do. Bring up our data set here, and here are all of our variables here. And let's go over to variable view and take a look at what we're looking for here. So here's D-depret. You can see it's a numeric variable, and here is feelings of hopelessness is D-feel2. Okay, back to data view. So the first thing we're going to do again is just like we did last week, descriptive statistics, frequencies, and we're going to pull over those two variables, D-depressed and D-hopeless. And again, we're going to do the same thing, statistics, get the mean, the median, the mode, standard deviation, the variance. You can get the range if you want. Continue. Get our charts. It doesn't ask specifically for the charts, but it's always a good idea to take a look at them and see what the distribution looks like, if it looks normal. A lot of our statistical tests assume that they're normal, and that's not always a good assumption to make. So take a look at them and see what they say. We'll hit continue. Okay. And here comes our output. So just like last week, we have our mean, our median, our mode, etc. Here's our frequency tables, and here's our histograms. All right, so we have that down, what we're looking for there. So now we want to look at the correlation. So back to our SPSS. We go to Analyze, Correlate, Bivariate. This means we're going to be looking at relationships between two variables at a time. Find our variables, depressed and hopeless. We're going to stay with Pearson, and this has to do with the fact that they're both continuous variables. We're going to go with two-tailed. So then we just click OK, and we get a correlation table. Now, this is set up as a matrix. So sometimes you'll do bivariate correlations for a whole bunch of variables, and they would just line up with more columns and more rows. So what you get down the diagonal is the correlation of each variable with itself. So that would be a perfect correlation, right? It's going to be, as one goes up, the other goes up exactly the same amount because they're perfectly correlated. That's one. We don't report that. It doesn't mean anything. What we're interested in are the ones that are not on the left to right diagonal. So the correlation of depression and feelings of hopelessness we would see here. And again, we see the same number down here because it's just the matrix in the other direction. And then we have a number here that's the significance. And it's very small here. It's not actually 0. It's probably 0.00032 something, whatever. The idea here is that this significance tells us how likely it is that there's a relationship between these two variables in the population. So right now we have a sample, this little sample that we have, and we want to infer something from the sample to the population. And we're going to talk a lot more about this in coming weeks, but just know that when we talk about the significance value, that's where we're going to be looking for. And if it's very small, it's actually a little bit in reverse. That's telling us that it's very, very unlikely that there's no relationship. So I know that gets confusing. Don't worry about it too much now. Think about just the correlation and what that means. Okay? So that's the correlation. We're looking here. And the next thing we want to do is a regression. And we need in a regression to figure out what's the dependent variable and what's the independent variable. So we want to predict depression based on helplessness. So the thing we want to predict is going to be our dependent variable, and the thing that's doing the predicting is our independent variable. So we go back, analyze, regression. We're doing a linear regression. We're looking for a line. So our dependent variable, depression. Our independent variable is feelings of hopelessness. And this is actually all we need to do here for right now is these two variables. We say OK. And again, what we get, this first box talks about all the different variables. We only have one variable that's a predictor variable, so that doesn't mean much for us. Here's the summary of everything, the whole model. And down here is what we're going to use to do those predictions that it's asking about. So in the assignment, it asks you what the regression equation will be. And as I said in the instructor guidance, you're going to use these numbers right here. So this is your constant, and this is your b value. So if you have a plus bx, this is a, this is b, and then x is the variable, the number that you know about hopelessness. And if you do 1.769 plus 0.639 times whatever the hopelessness value is, you will get your predicted depression value. So these are the numbers right here you want to look for. Now for the whole model, this number up here is telling us whether the model is significant or not. And so that's what we're looking for when we look at regressions. And that's going to be very similar to our correlation, but this will help you do the predictions that you need. So that is everything that you need to do, with one exception. We need to make a scatter plot or a graph of these variables. So let me show you how to do that. Go up to graphs. There's a couple of different ways you can do here. I'm going to show you a legacy dialog, which is a little more straightforward. Scatter dot plot, simple scatter, define. All right, on the y-axis, we're going to put our depression. It's fairly common to put your dependent variable on the y-axis and your independent variable on the x-axis. So we're okay there. Now this comes out looking a little weird because there's no values in between 3 and 4. Each scale is just 1 to 7, so everything seems to be piled up on top of each other. Your graph for the assignment will mean a little bit more. But the other thing we can do is add in a regression line here. By double-clicking that, it brings up a chart editor. And elements, we want a fit line, and we want that linear line. So it makes that automatically. We hit close. And what this is doing is basically showing us the line that regression equation tells you. So how many go up, over, how many go over, how many go up. And we see that this is again slanted in a positive direction, telling us as one goes up, the other goes up. And in fact, what we see is there's very few variables, or very few people down here. There's no dots. That means when people have high feelings of hopelessness, it's not very likely that they're going to have low feelings of depression. And similarly up here, if you have low feelings of hopelessness, then it's unlikely, there's a few people, but not many, who are up here having high feelings of depression. So again, we see it's another way of confirming that relationship between these two variables. So there you go, that's the procedure. I hope it helps. And as always, ask if you have questions.